What if I told you the most dangerous enemy on a pirate ship wasn't the British Navy, a rival captain, or even a hurricane? It was the ship itself. Not the men chasing you, not the cannons aimed at your hull, but the very wooden body beneath your boots, slowly soaking, splitting, rotting, and dying every single day in the middle of the ocean. That's the part pirate movies never show you. They give you the black flags, the treasure maps, the sword fights, the roaring cannons. What they leave out is that a pirate ship was basically a floating emergency. Every plank was under pressure, every rope was wearing out, every sail was tearing, every barrel was spoiling, every iron fitting was rusting, and every gallon of seawater trying to force its way inside was part of a daily battle that never stopped. If a pirate crew couldn't keep their ship alive, nothing else mattered. No raids, no treasure, no legend. Just a slow, ugly death somewhere at sea. That's what made pirate life so brutal. These men were criminals, yes, but they also had to be mechanics, carpenters, logisticians, medics, riggers, and survival experts all at once. A pirate captain could be fearless in battle and still lose everything because his hull was worm-eaten, his pump broke, or his rigging snapped during a storm. In the golden age of piracy, roughly from the late 1600s into the early 1700s, the ocean was not just a battlefield, it was a machine built to destroy wooden ships. Salt ate metal, water seeped through seams, tropical heat bred rot, tiny sea creatures drilled through hulls, fresh supplies spoiled fast. And unlike legal merchants or naval officers, pirates couldn't just sail openly into the nearest friendly port, pay for repairs, and relax at a dock. Most of the time, they were outlaws with prices on their heads. Going into the wrong harbor could get them arrested, hanged, or betrayed before they ever touched land. So when people imagine pirates as free men living without rules, they're missing the truth. Pirate crews survived because they were disciplined in the places that actually mattered. Their freedom depended on maintenance. Their rebellion depended on organization. Their reputation depended on whether the ship could still float next week. And once you understand that, piracy starts to look less like non-stop adventure and more like constant damage control with pistols. The first thing to understand is that pirate ships were not usually custom-built pirate vessels. Pirates took what they could get. They captured merchant sloops, brigantines, schooners, and sometimes larger ships, then modified them for speed, combat, and intimidation. That sounds clever until you realize what it meant in practice. Most pirate ships already had problems before pirates ever stepped aboard. A vessel might be old, patched up, badly built, warped by previous voyages, or neglected by a desperate owner. Pirates inherited all of that. They were basically stealing used vehicles in the middle of the age of sail and trying to turn them into high-performance machines without access to a real repair network. And wooden ships were never sealed in the modern sense. They were alive in a weird way. They flexed with the sea. Their planks expanded and shrank with moisture and heat. Their seams opened and tightened depending on weather, stress, and age. Even a healthy ship leaked. That wasn't a sign of disaster. That was normal. Water came in through the seams, around fittings, through cracks, and from spray washing over the deck. The real question wasn't whether water was entering the ship, it was how much, and whether the crew could get rid of it fast enough. That's where the bilge came in. The low, foul part of the ship where leaked seawater, mud, spilled liquids, slime, and filth collected. Picture a dark, damp cavity under the lower deck that smelled like rot, tar, old wood, stale food, and stagnant water. That was part of everyday life. If too much water built up there, the ship grew heavier, slower, and less stable. If it got bad enough, the ship simply sank. So men had to pump constantly, not once in a while, constantly. This was one of the hidden rhythms of life at sea. While people imagined pirates shouting and firing cannons, a huge part of reality was just turning pumps to keep the ocean from winning. And those pumps could fail. The mechanism might jam, the wood could swell, the chain could break, leather parts could rot, or debris in the bilge could interfere with the movement. The moment that happened, the ship turned into a countdown clock. If the crew couldn't repair the pump quickly, they would have to bail by hand, bucket after bucket, while praying the leak wasn't getting worse. This is one reason skilled carpenters were incredibly valuable. A good ship's carpenter wasn't just some background crewman with a hammer. He was one of the most important men on board. He patched hull damage, reinforced beams, repaired masts, checked planking, worked on pumps, and made decisions that could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. On some ships, a talented carpenter was worth more than several fighters. Then there was the enemy you couldn't always see from above the waterline: shipworms. The name sounds gross, but not especially terrifying until you understand what they did. These creatures burrowed into submerged wood and hollowed it out from the inside. A hull could look fine on the surface while its inner strength was being eaten away below. In warm waters, especially around the Caribbean and tropical coasts where pirates loved to operate, shipworm damage could turn a vessel into a hidden death trap. And that's what made it so nasty. The damage wasn't always dramatic at first. There was no huge explosion, no cinematic crack, no warning music. Just slow destruction under the water, day after day, until the ship became weak, leaky, and dangerously compromised. That's why pirate crews had to perform one of the hardest and riskiest repair operations in the age of sail: careening. This was not some minor touch-up, it was a full-scale survival ritual. The crew would search for a remote beach or sheltered cove, ideally hidden from trade routes and naval patrols. Then they would unload cargo, supplies, guns, and anything else heavy enough to make the vessel easier to tilt. Using ropes, anchors, tackles, and raw manpower, they would haul the ship partly onto its side so one half of the hull rose out of the water. Only then could they really inspect the bottom. Imagine the scene: a pirate ship, stripped and leaning awkwardly on a lonely shore, cannons removed, supplies piled on the beach, men scraping at the hull under brutal sun, others watching the horizon in fear that a naval vessel might appear at any moment. Because while a ship was careened, it was incredibly vulnerable. It couldn't fight properly, it couldn't flee, it was exposed and half disabled. So maintenance wasn't just physical labor, it was a huge gamble. Once the hull was exposed, the crew got to work. Barnacles had to be hacked and scraped off because they created drag and made the ship slower. Seaweed and marine growth had to be removed. Damaged planks had to be inspected and replaced if possible. Seams might need fresh caulking. Protective coatings made from tar, fat, sulfur, or other materials could be smeared on the wood to slow further attack. None of this was elegant. It was hot, disgusting, exhausting labor. But a clean hull meant speed, and speed meant everything to pirates. Speed let them chase, escape, ambush, and survive. A slow pirate ship was practically a dead pirate ship. Rigging was another full-time nightmare. A sailing ship depended on an enormous network of ropes, lines, pulleys, spars, and sails, and all of it lived under stress. Every gust, every roll of the sea, every squall, every sharp maneuver pulled at the rigging. Rope in that era was made from natural fibers, especially hemp, and natural fiber rope was strong but not immortal. It soaked up moisture, stiffened with salt, frayed from friction, and rotted with neglect. Some ropes were tarred to resist water and wear, but tar brought its own problems. It was sticky, messy, and made handling the lines miserable. Sailors ended up with blackened hands and clothes smeared with grime. Still, without tarred rigging, important support lines would weaken too quickly. This meant splicing ropes was an everyday skill, not some fancy specialist trick. When a line frayed or snapped, you didn't toss it and order a new one online. You repaired it right there with your own hands. Men had to know how to weave strands back together, reinforce weak points, and judge whether a line could still be trusted under strain. A bad repair during calm weather was annoying. A bad repair in a storm could kill people. The pulleys, called blocks, also needed attention. These wooden devices guided ropes and multiplied force, but if they seized up, cracked, or wore down, the whole rigging system suffered. A stuck block could make it impossible to trim a sail quickly. A failed one might send a heavy spar swinging or leave a crucial line useless when seconds mattered. So they had to be greased, checked, and sometimes rebuilt. Again, none of that looks glamorous in a movie, but that invisible upkeep is what kept the ship responsive and alive. The sails were just as demanding. Canvas tore, seams opened, corners weakened under repeated strain. Salt stiffened cloth, sunlight degraded fibers, and strong winds punished every flaw. Sails were the engine of the ship, and damaged sails meant lost speed, poor maneuverability, and danger in bad weather. So they had to be patched constantly with heavy needles and waxed thread. Picture a crewman hunched over thick canvas, forcing a giant needle through stiff fabric while the ship rocks under him. That was pirate life too, not just battle, but stitching. And then there were the masts and spars, giant wooden structures under relentless load. A mast wasn't just a pole sticking up from the deck, it was a critical support system carrying sails, lines, and immense force from the wind. If a mast cracked, shifted, or failed, the entire ship could be crippled. Replacing a mast at sea was brutally difficult. Temporary repairs might involve reinforcing weak points, adjusting the rigging, or jury-rigging a solution with spare timber and pure desperation. The sea rewarded improvisation, but only if it was done by people who knew what they were doing. Now add food and water to the picture. This is where pirate survival gets even uglier. Fresh water was one of the most important things on any voyage, but storing it for long periods was incredibly hard. Water sat in wooden casks, and casks leaked, soured, bred slime, or picked up foul tastes from the wood. Over time, water could become disgusting enough that men still drank it only because the alternative was worse. This is part of why alcoholic drink rations mattered. Rum and other spirits weren't just about getting drunk. Mixed into water, they could make foul supplies a bit more tolerable and sometimes slightly safer. Not clean, not healthy, but more manageable. The barrels themselves required maintenance too. A cracked cask wasted precious liquid. A contaminated one ruined morale and threatened health. So coopers, the men skilled at making and repairing barrels, were incredibly useful. Again, pirate crews valued practical trades because a ship was basically a moving ecosystem made of wood, iron, rope, fabric, and food that all decayed at once. Food was no better. Hardtack lasted a long time, which sounds good until you remember that it was famously hard, bland, and often infested. Salted meat could survive storage, but only up to a point, and tropical heat was merciless. If preservation failed, food spoiled fast. Pirates had to raid for supplies not just because they were greedy, but because they needed constant replenishment. Fresh fruit, vegetables, livestock, grain, and water were survival items. A captured ship with useful provisions could be more valuable than one carrying fancy goods. That brings us to disease, especially scurvy, one of the great killers of seafaring life. Pirates didn't fully understand vitamin C, but they absolutely lived with the consequences of lacking fresh food. Gums bleeding, wounds reopening, weakness, joint pain, teeth loosening, bodies falling apart slowly from deficiency. It was horrifying. The cruel irony is that a pirate crew might survive battle after battle only to be wrecked by diet. Fresh citrus or produce could make an enormous difference, but access was inconsistent, and no amount of bravery could intimidate a nutritional deficiency. Weapons had their own maintenance demands too. Cannons were terrifying, but they were also giant iron problems. Salt air attacked metal constantly, rust built up, components had to be cleaned, oiled, and inspected. The touch hole had to stay clear and functional. Carriages, usually wooden, absorbed huge shocks when guns fired and could crack or loosen over time. Wheels wore down, fastenings strained. Powder had to stay dry because wet black powder was almost useless. That meant careful storage, strict handling, and constant attention. A ship with poorly maintained guns might look dangerous from a distance and become pathetic in a real fight. Even hand weapons needed care. Pistols, muskets, cutlasses, powder flasks, shot, and flints all required organization and maintenance. Moisture was always a threat. Rust was always creeping in. A pirate boarding party depended on weapons that would actually function when drawn. So yes, these men were outlaws, but they also lived in a world where sloppiness could get you killed before the enemy even touched you. What's really fascinating is how all this maintenance changed the social structure of pirate life. We tend to imagine pirate crews as pure chaos, but chaos doesn't keep a damaged ship afloat for months. Practical order does. Pirate ships often ran under articles, shared agreements that laid out rules, duties, compensation, and discipline. They were not democratic in a modern, idealized sense, but they often distributed authority and accountability in ways that were surprisingly structured for criminal crews. Why? Because they had to. Too much was at stake. A captain might lead in battle, but expertise mattered everywhere else. The carpenter, quartermaster, boatswain, gunner, cooper, and sailmaker all held real importance because the ship depended on them. Men with useful skills were valuable not in theory, but in daily, measurable ways. A brilliant fighter who couldn't help the ship survive was less useful than a mediocre fighter who could repair rigging in a storm or patch a dangerous leak. Pirate culture still had violence, greed, and brutal power struggles, but under all that, there was a hard truth. The ocean punished incompetence without mercy. And that's the deepest twist in this whole story. Pirates are usually remembered as symbols of wild freedom, but their world was ruled by maintenance. Every sunrise brought another list of problems. Pumps to work, seams to inspect, sails to patch, ropes to splice, casks to check, hull berth to scrape, rust to fight, food to ration, water to monitor, powder to protect. There was no pause button, no shore leave fantasy that lasted long. Even when the sea looked calm, the ship was aging beneath them. That constant decay shaped everything. It shaped where pirates sailed, because some waters were harder on hulls than others. It shaped when they attacked, because a ship in poor repair couldn't risk a long chase. It shaped which prizes they valued, because useful supplies often mattered more than shiny luxuries. It shaped leadership, because a reckless captain could doom the whole crew by ignoring repair needs. It even shaped fear. A pirate might smile at the thought of battle and still quietly dread the sound of a new creak in the hull during the night. So the next time you picture a pirate ship slicing across blue water under a black flag, remember what that image leaves out. Beneath the romance was rot. Beneath the legend was labor. Beneath the swagger was a crew fighting a wooden war against water, worms, rust, wind, hunger, and time. These ships were not invincible outlaw fortresses. They were fragile machines held together by sweat, skill, and relentless attention. The ocean never stopped trying to tear them apart, and the pirates never had the luxury of stopping their repairs. That may be the most impressive part of pirate history. Not the treasure, not the violence, not the myths, but the sheer stubbornness. These were men living outside the law, often hunted, often exhausted, often filthy and underfed, yet still capable of keeping stolen, aging ships alive, far from any safe harbor. They did it with muscle, craft, improvisation, and a brutal understanding that if the ship died, they died with it. In the end, that was the real pirate battle. Not man against empire, not outlaw against navy, but crew against collapse, every single day in the middle of the sea. And honestly, once you see piracy through that lens, it becomes even more intense, because treasure hunts are fun, but survival is gripping. The real drama wasn't just whether pirates could take a ship, it was whether they could keep their own from falling apart long enough to matter. That's the hidden story. That's the human story, and that's what makes pirate history so much more brutal, technical, and fascinating than the myth ever admits. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because history gets a whole lot wilder when you look past the legend and into the machinery that kept it alive.